Do you seriously expect us to pay $18,600? Patty Caldwell's voice cut across the Cedar Ridge clubhouse so sharply that every conversation in the room stopped. She stood at the end of the board table with my invoice in one hand and her reading glasses in the other, staring at me like I had personally invented arithmetic to ruin her evening. I was sitting 12 feet away with a yellow legal pad, a property survey, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. My name is Michael Grant. I was 49 years old, and for 3 years I had watched the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association operate a parking program on asphalt I owned. Not beside my property, not behind it, on it. 24 parking spaces, property taxes in my name, maintenance bills paid from my checking account, and somehow Patty had spent 3 years convincing an entire neighborhood that those white lines belonged to her association. Now the room smelled like stale coffee, printer paper, and the lemon cleaner they used on the folding tables. 6 board members sat beneath fluorescent lights while homeowners crowded the chairs behind them. Kevin Rhodes, the association treasurer, kept looking from Patty to the invoice and back again. Patty slapped the paper onto the table. $200 a day, she said. For 93 days. This is absurd. I glanced at the wall clock. 8:17 in the evening. Then I looked at the date printed on the invoice. No, I said. That was yesterday. Her expression tightened. Excuse me. Today makes 94. Nobody laughed. That was when I knew the board finally understood I was not bluffing. Patty opened the thick binder she had carried into every meeting since this dispute began. She had copies of the association bylaws, parking maps, old correspondence, towing policies, and the document she believed settled everything. A recorded easement crossing my property. She tapped it with one finger. Cedar Ridge has legal access rights. Yes, I said. You do. She hesitated. That answer was not what she expected. For years, Patty had treated the word access like a master key. Access meant parking. Access meant numbered spaces. Access meant windshield permits, towing warnings, association signs, and residents leaving their vehicles overnight on a lot they had never paid to maintain. At least, that was her interpretation. Mine had changed 94 days earlier when a real estate attorney read the same document and pointed to 2 words Patty apparently never thought mattered. Those 2 words were now costing her association $200 every sunrise they refused to stop. Kevin leaned forward. Michael, are you saying we never had parking rights? Before I could answer, Patty cut in. We have used that lot for 3 years. She said it like time could turn permission into ownership. I reached into my folder and placed a faded parking warning on the table. Cedar Ridge logo. My license plate number. My work truck. 3 years earlier, Patty's association had put that notice under my windshield wiper because I had parked in my own parking lot. I had been angry enough to throw it away. Instead, I kept it. That little piece of paper was still flat on the table when I looked at Patty and said, 3 years is exactly why we are here. The strange part was that none of this started with a lawsuit, a gate, or even an argument. It started with 24 faded white lines behind a small commercial building and an easement I thought meant exactly what Patty told me it meant. 3 years earlier, those 24 parking spaces were the least interesting part of the property. I had bought a small commercial building on the edge of Cedar Ridge after spending nearly 2 decades managing maintenance and renovation work for other people. The building was nothing glamorous. 2 brick storefronts faced the county road. A narrow office occupied the second floor, and behind everything sat a rectangular parking lot with faded white lines, cracked asphalt, and weeds pushing through the edges. I liked it because it was manageable. I could repair most things myself. The tenants were steady, and the numbers made sense. The deed included the building, the rear lot, and all 24 parking spaces. I knew that because I had read the legal description at closing and kept a copy in a gray folder inside my office desk. There was one complication. Along the eastern side of the lot ran a narrow paved lane connecting Cedar Ridge to the county road. An old recorded easement gave the neighborhood access through that lane. My closing attorney mentioned it, explained that I could not block the route, and moved on. I did the same. People occasionally drove through. Delivery vans used it. Residents used it when the subdivision entrance was busy. None of that bothered me. Access was access. The parking spaces were something else. At least, that was what I assumed. During my first summer, I spent 2 Saturdays repairing potholes and sealing cracks before paying a local crew to refresh several of the faded lines. The August sun reflected off the black pavement so hard that I could feel heat through my work boots. Sarah brought me lemonade while I measured the spaces with a tape and chalk. Near the back corner stood an old metal sign left by the previous owner. Private parking. The paint was faded, one bolt was rusted, and the post leaned slightly toward the fence. I tightened the bolt and forgot about it. A few months later, I began noticing unfamiliar cars staying overnight. First 2, then 4, then 8. They were always gone by morning, so I assumed neighbors were using empty spaces temporarily. Then small blue tags appeared inside their windshields. Cedar Ridge resident parking permit. I picked up one that had fallen near a curb and turned it over in my hand. A space number was printed on the back. Number 11. The next morning, a white utility vehicle pulled into the lot. Patty Caldwell stepped out wearing a gray blazer and carrying a clipboard. I knew her only as the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association president. She walked from car to car checking permits, writing something beside each license plate. Morning, I called. She looked up. Good morning. What are you doing? Parking compliance. I glanced around my lot. For Cedar Ridge? Yes. On my property. That earned the first smile I would eventually learn to recognize. Patient. Polished. Slightly amused. The association has recorded access rights here, Mr. Grant. She tapped her clipboard as if the conversation had already been settled somewhere inside it. Residents have been authorized to use these spaces for overflow parking. I looked toward the faded private parking sign, then back at her. Authorized by who? The association. A cold breeze pushed a dry leaf across the asphalt between us. I could hear its edges scratching over the pavement. The association does not own this lot. Patty did not hesitate. We have an easement. She said the word with such confidence that, for a moment, I wondered whether I had misunderstood my own closing documents. Then she turned back toward the parked cars and continued checking permits. That afternoon, I opened the gray folder in my office desk and found the easement for the first time since closing. I read that easement 3 times that afternoon and understood just enough to make myself uncertain. The document was old, dense, and full of legal language that seemed designed to turn simple pavement into a philosophy problem. I recognized my parcel number. I recognized the narrow eastern lane. I recognized Cedar Ridge. And I recognized the word access appearing more than once. What I did not find was a sentence saying the association could assign my parking spaces to residents. Still, Patty sounded so certain that I decided to handle it like a reasonable property owner instead of starting a legal fight over 8 cars. I emailed the association and asked them to stop issuing parking permits for my lot until we clarified the easement. Patty replied the next morning. She thanked me for my concern, cited the recorded access rights, and said Cedar Ridge had historically used the area for overflow parking. Historically, that word did a lot of work for her. Within 2 weeks, 8 cars became 12. Then 2 green signs appeared on steel posts near the entrance. Cedar Ridge, overflow parking. Permit required. I stood beneath one on a cold November morning while the wind pushed the smell of wet leaves across the asphalt. I had not approved the sign. I had not installed the post. Yet there it was, planted beside pavement listed on my property tax bill. I called Patty. You put signs on my lot. They are parking management signs. That does not answer what I said. She sighed softly. Michael, the association has to manage the area responsibly. You do not manage my property. We have recorded rights. There it was again. Recorded rights. 2 words that ended every conversation. I sent another email. Then a certified letter. I received polite responses that changed nothing. The signs stayed. Blue windshield permits multiplied. The association painted small numbers at the ends of several spaces and distributed parking rules to residents. I considered hiring an attorney, but the commercial building had just needed a new rooftop heating unit. One tenant was late on rent, and Sarah and I were helping our daughter with college expenses. Spending thousands of dollars to litigate parking spaces that were mostly empty during business hours felt ridiculous. Patty seemed to understand that calculation better than I did. Months became a year, then 2. Every spring, I paid the property tax. Every summer, I sealed cracks. After a heavy storm clogged the drain near Space 17, I paid $840 to have it cleared and repaired. Cedar Ridge paid nothing. They simply kept parking. By the 3rd year, the lot no longer looked like mine. Residents knew their assigned numbers. Patty's association circulated towing rules. A contractor even replaced one of the green signs without asking me. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, I pulled my work truck into Space 9 while I unloaded boxes for a tenant. I was inside less than 40 minutes. When I came back out, a bright yellow paper was tucked beneath my windshield wiper. Cedar Ridge parking violation. Unauthorized vehicle. I stood there with the paper in my hand while an autumn leaf scraped across the hood. My truck. My asphalt. My tax bill. Their warning. Patty happened to drive through the access lane 5 minutes later. She lowered her window when she saw me. "You need a resident permit for overnight designated spaces," she said. "This is my parking lot. Those spaces are managed by Cedar Ridge." I looked at the yellow warning again. Something about seeing my license plate printed beneath their logo changed the way the whole situation felt. I did not argue. I folded the notice once, put it in my shirt pocket, and went back inside. Instead of throwing it away, I placed it in the gray folder with my deed, tax records, repair invoices, certified letters, and that old easement. I still did not know it then, but Patty had just handed me the best record of what Cedar Ridge had been doing for 3 years. For the next several months, I kept telling myself the same thing. I own the pavement, so eventually the paperwork would catch up with common sense. It did not. Cedar Ridge became more comfortable with my parking lot every week. The green signs were followed by freshly painted numbers at the ends of the spaces. Then came laminated parking notices distributed to residents. Patty even hired a towing company to patrol what she called the association overflow area, although I never signed a contract with them and never gave anyone permission to enforce parking rules on my parcel. I sent another certified letter objecting to it. Patty responded with 3 pages of association language and another reference to their recorded access rights. By then, I knew arguing with her was like pushing against a locked door. She did not need to prove she was right if continuing to act right was cheaper than forcing me to challenge her. So life kept moving. My tenants opened their businesses every morning. Delivery trucks came and went. Sarah and I helped our daughter move into college. Winter salt whitened the asphalt, spring rain filled the cracks, and summer heat softened the sealant along the southern edge. I paid for all of it. One year, the property tax bill arrived on the same afternoon I watched Patty walk through the lot checking Cedar Ridge permits. I stood at my office window holding an envelope that said I owed thousands of dollars on land she was managing for free. That was the moment the situation stopped feeling ridiculous and started feeling calculated. I began keeping everything. Tax statements, asphalt invoices, drainage repairs, photographs of the numbered spaces, copies of my certified letters, copies of Patty's replies. I photographed every association sign from several angles and saved the dates. Still, I did not know what to do with any of it. Then, almost 3 years after the first blue permit appeared, my bank changed everything. I wanted to refinance the building before an adjustable commercial loan reset, and the lender ordered an appraisal and title review. The appraiser walked the property on a gray Monday morning carrying a tablet. When we reached the rear lot, he stopped beside Space 9 and looked at the Cedar Ridge sign. "Does the homeowners association own this section?" "No." "Do they lease it?" "No." He looked at me. "Then why are they assigning parking?" I gave him the answer I had heard for 3 years. "They have an easement." He made a note on his tablet. 2 days later, the lender asked for documentation explaining the association's parking rights. I pulled out the gray folder. For the first time, Patty's interpretation was no longer just irritating me. It was interfering with a financial transaction involving my property. Sarah found me at the kitchen table that evening surrounded by papers. The yellow warning from my work truck sat near my elbow. "Call somebody," she said. "Not the association. Somebody who actually reads these things for a living." The next morning, I called Ethan Brooks, a real estate attorney recommended by one of my tenants. His office smelled like coffee and old books, and he barely spoke while reading the easement. He traced one paragraph with his finger, turned back to the legal description, then read the same paragraph again. Finally, he looked up. "Michael, what exactly does Cedar Ridge claim this lets them do?" "Park. Assign spaces. Issue permits. Tow unauthorized vehicles. They say they have access rights." Ethan leaned back slowly. "They do have access rights." My stomach sank. Then he tapped 2 words printed in the document. "But this says ingress and egress." I waited. "That means the right to pass through the designated lane," he said. "Where are you seeing a right to occupy 24 parking spaces?" I looked down at the page. For 3 years, Patty had built her entire parking system around one word: access. Ethan had just shown me the two words that defined its limits. Ethan did not tell me to celebrate. He told me to slow down. That was the first reason I trusted him. He spread my deed, survey, easement, tax records, and photographs across his conference table and spent nearly an hour separating what I owned from what Cedar Ridge was actually entitled to use. The distinction was almost embarrassingly simple once somebody explained it clearly. The association had a recorded right to travel through a designated lane along the eastern side of my parcel. Cars could enter from Cedar Ridge, cross that lane, and reach the county road. I could not put up a gate that blocked it. I could not park equipment across it. I could not pretend the easement did not exist just because the land underneath belonged to me. But the 24 parking spaces beside that lane were different. Ethan traced their location on the survey with the cap of his pen. "This is your parking area," he said. "Their right to pass through does not automatically give them the right to occupy it, assign spaces, install parking signs, or operate an enforcement program." I thought about every conversation I had with Patty. Every time she said access rights as if those words answered everything. "So I can tow all their cars tomorrow?" I asked. Ethan shook his head immediately. "That is exactly what you are not going to do." He explained that residents had been told by their association that they were authorized to park there. Turning ordinary homeowners into collateral damage would create unnecessary problems and make me look reckless. More importantly, the access lane still had to remain open. "We give the association clear notice," he said. "We define what they can use and what they cannot. Then we document what happens next." That afternoon, Ethan drafted a formal letter. It acknowledged Cedar Ridge's right of ingress and egress through the designated lane, which meant Patty could not claim I was trying to interfere with legitimate access. Then it identified the parking areas separately and demanded that the association stop issuing permits, assigning spaces, posting parking rules, and representing the lot as association-controlled property. They were given a deadline. After that date, if Cedar Ridge continued using and managing the parking area without an agreement, I would demand $200 for each day of continued unauthorized use, along with documented maintenance costs and other expenses subject to legal resolution. The number was not magic. It was not a fine I could invent and automatically collect. It was a daily use charge we were putting on the table before the association chose whether to keep occupying my property. Ethan sent the letter by certified mail and email. Patty replied less than 4 hours later. Her message was 8 sentences long. I remember the last one exactly. "The association rejects your invented fee and will continue exercising its recorded rights." Ethan read it twice. Save that. The deadline arrived on a Monday. At 7:15 that morning, I drove into the lot with coffee in the cup holder. 11 Cedar Ridge vehicles were parked in numbered spaces. Blue permits sat behind windshields. Both green association signs were still standing. The access lane remained completely clear. I parked beside my building, took photographs from the same 4 positions Ethan had recommended, and recorded the time. Then I went upstairs to my office. On a yellow legal pad, I wrote the date. Beside it, I wrote $200. The next morning, the same thing. 400. Wednesday, 600. Friday, 1,000. Patty never called. She did not remove a sign. She did not cancel a permit. She had spent 3 years believing I would eventually get tired of objecting. What she did not understand was that I had finally stopped trying to convince her. I was counting. By day 12, the number on my yellow legal pad was $2,400, and nothing outside my office window had changed. Every morning, Cedar Ridge residents pulled into the same numbered spaces. Every evening, blue permits glowed behind windshields under the parking lot lights. Patty's green signs remained planted beside the pavement like they had grown there. I kept the eastern access lane completely open, exactly as the easement required, and documented everything else. Ethan had given me a simple routine. Same 4 camera positions. Same approximate time. Wide photograph of the lot. Photograph of the numbered spaces. Photograph of the association signs. Notes showing how many spaces were occupied. I also installed 2 security cameras covering my building entrances and parking area, positioned only toward my property and the public-facing lot. The cameras were there for ordinary property security, but they gave me something Patty never expected me to have: consistency. Day 15, $3,000. Day 20, $4,000. Day 30, $6,000. I did not send Patty an angry message every morning. I did not confront residents getting out of their cars. Most of them believed they were parking exactly where their association told them they could. My problem was not with a nurse coming home after a 12-hour shift or a father carrying groceries from his trunk. My problem was with the organization issuing those permits. Once a week, Ethan sent Cedar Ridge an updated notice documenting continued use and reminding the board that my demand was increasing by $200 each day the parking operation continued after the deadline. Patty answered the first two. She called the demand baseless. After that, she stopped replying. But Cedar Ridge kept producing evidence for me. A November newsletter reminded residents to display association parking permits in the overflow lot. A winter email warned that vehicles without permits could be subject to enforcement. Then somebody replaced faded numbers near spaces 4 through 8 with fresh white paint. I photographed the wet paint before noon. The smell carried all the way to my office door. Kevin Rhodes finally called me on day 37. His voice was quieter than Patty's had ever been. Michael, is this really at $7,400? That is the current demand. Patty says the easement covers us. Then ask her to show you the sentence that says parking. Silence. I could hear papers moving on his end. Our attorney is reviewing it, he said. Good. Would you stop adding the daily charge while we review? I looked through my window. 14 Cedar Ridge vehicles occupied my spaces. Are you stopping the parking program while you review? Another silence. I cannot authorize that myself. Then I cannot pretend the use stopped. After we hung up, I wrote down the date, time, and what we discussed. Patty sent a community message that evening telling residents parking operations would continue normally. I printed it. Sarah found the growing stack on my kitchen table later that night. She really thinks you will quit, she said. I looked at the latest photograph. Same green sign. Same numbered spaces. Same blue permits. No, I said. She thinks nothing is happening. That was the mistake. Something was happening every single day. Patty just could not hear it because the clock made no sound. On day 41, Cedar Ridge made the mistake I had been waiting 3 years to see repeated. I arrived at the building just after 8 in the morning and parked my work truck in space 9, the same space where I had received that yellow warning months earlier. The eastern access lane was completely clear. I was not blocking traffic, a driveway, a fire route, or another vehicle. I carried 2 boxes into my tenant's office, checked a leaking sink upstairs, and returned outside about an hour later. A white slip of paper moved beneath my windshield wiper in the cold breeze. For a second, I simply stared at it. Then I smelled fresh coffee from the cup in my hand and heard tires humming along the county road behind me. Everything else seemed unusually quiet. I lifted the paper carefully. Cedar Ridge parking violation. Unauthorized vehicle. Same association logo. Same parking program. Same truck. I almost smiled. Instead, I photographed the notice exactly where I found it, then photographed my truck inside the painted lines, the open access lane, the green Cedar Ridge sign, and the blue permits visible in nearby vehicles. I took the warning upstairs and opened the gray folder. The first yellow notice was still there, slightly creased where I had folded it 3 years earlier. I placed the new white notice beside it. 2 warnings. 3 years apart. Both issued against my vehicle while it sat on my parcel. I called Ethan. They did it again. Did what? Issued me another parking violation. He went silent for a second. Do not throw it away. I still have the first one. Another pause. Bring me both. By noon, the 2 notices were lying side by side on Ethan's conference table. He studied the dates, my license plate number, and the association language. This helps, he said. A lot. He explained why. Cedar Ridge had spent weeks suggesting that residents merely used the property because of historical access. But these warnings showed something more deliberate. The association was assigning spaces, deciding which vehicles could remain, and claiming authority to enforce those decisions. That was management, not simply passage through an easement. Ethan scanned both notices and added them to the file. Then he forwarded copies to Cedar Ridge's attorney with the latest accounting. Day 41. $8,200. Patty responded before the end of the afternoon. She claimed my truck had violated established community parking rules. Ethan read her email and looked at me across his desk. Established by whom? The answer was obvious. That evening, Kevin Rhodes called again. Michael, the board needs to meet with you. About the parking? About everything. His voice sounded tired. Patty says your interpretation is wrong. Our counsel says we need to discuss the scope of the easement. I looked through my office window. A resident was pulling into space for beneath one of Patty's green signs. Set the meeting. 3 days later, Cedar Ridge sent a formal notice scheduling an emergency board conference. Patty would attend. Their attorney would attend. Ethan would attend with me. I printed the email and placed it inside the gray folder. Before closing it, I looked once more at those 2 parking warnings. For 3 years, Patty had treated them like proof that she controlled my lot. Now they were going into the room with us as proof of exactly how far she had gone. The emergency board conference began on day 93, which was how the number reached $18,600. Ethan and I arrived at the Cedar Ridge clubhouse 10 minutes early. I carried the gray folder. He carried one thin legal file. Patty was already there with a binder thick enough to make mine look like a grocery receipt. Kevin Rhodes sat beside her, along with 4 other board members and the association attorney, Margaret Cole. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee that had been sitting too long. I recognized the same fluorescent hum from every meeting where Patty had told me the association had recorded rights. This time, nobody started with small talk. Patty placed my latest demand on the table. Do you seriously expect us to pay $18,600? That was the moment I remembered at the beginning, except now I knew exactly what had brought us there. After I told her the amount represented yesterday's total, Margaret raised one hand. Before we discuss money, we need to establish the scope of the easement. Ethan nodded. Agreed. Patty opened her binder immediately. Finally, she removed a copy of the recorded document and pushed it toward Margaret. Cedar Ridge has used this access for years. Ethan did not argue. Yes. Patty looked almost surprised. Then there is no dispute. There is a very specific dispute. Ethan turned the document toward her. Please show us where this easement grants Cedar Ridge the right to park vehicles on Mr. Grant's property. Patty looked down. Her finger moved across the paragraph. It grants access. We agree. Residents need access to the area. They have access through the designated lane. Ethan placed the survey beside the easement. Where does it grant the association the right to occupy these 24 spaces? Patty's finger stopped. Margaret leaned closer and began reading. Nobody spoke for nearly 20 seconds. The heating system clicked somewhere behind me. Finally, Patty said, the association has historically managed parking there. Ethan opened my gray folder. That is why we documented the management. First came photographs of the green Cedar Ridge signs. Then parking permits. Then numbered spaces. Then newsletters telling residents where to park. Then emails describing enforcement. Then the 2 notices issued against my work truck. Ethan placed those side by side. These are 3 years apart, he said. Margaret studied them. Kevin leaned forward. Both are Michael's truck? Same license plate, I said. Patty crossed her arms. He violated our parking rules. Margaret looked up at her. Patricia, that statement may be part of the problem. The room went quiet again. Ethan slid my property tax statements and maintenance invoices across the table. Drainage repair. Cracked ceiling. Asphalt work. Every dollar paid by me. Mr. Grant has never disputed Cedar Ridge's right to pass through the eastern lane, Ethan said. He has kept that lane unobstructed. The issue is the association's separate use and control of the parking area after repeated objections and after formal notice. Kevin looked at Patty. Did we ever have a parking agreement with him? She did not answer immediately. Margaret asked the question again. Was there a lease, license, parking agreement, amendment, or other recorded document? Patty turned several pages in her binder. I watched her search the same paperwork she had used to end every conversation for 3 years. She found the easement. She found association maps. She found parking policies. She found old board minutes. What she did not find was permission from me. Margaret finally closed the easement. We need to discuss settlement. Patty looked at me across the table. For the first time since I had met her, she did not say the words recorded rights. I looked at the clock. 8:17. Day 94 had already started. The meter had just moved again. Settlement took another 11 days, and those 11 days taught me something Patty had never understood about the $200. It was never a magic fine. It was a clock. Every morning Cedar Ridge continued operating its parking program after formal notice gave Ethan another dated photograph, another occupancy record, another piece of evidence showing that the association had chosen not to stop. Their attorney understood that immediately. 2 days after the emergency meeting, Margaret sent Ethan a proposal. Cedar Ridge would stop issuing new permits, but existing residents could continue parking until the end of the month. Ethan asked whether they wanted the daily demand to continue during that period. The revised proposal arrived before lunch. Parking would end within 72 hours. The green signs came down on a cold Thursday morning. I watched from my second-floor office as a maintenance contractor loosened the bolts and lifted the first sign from its post. 3 years earlier, I had stood beneath that same sign wondering how an organization that did not own my land had become comfortable enough to install it. Now the empty post leaned over the asphalt for less than an hour before it disappeared too. Cedar Ridge notified residents that their overflow permits were no longer valid on my property. Nobody was suddenly stranded. The association arranged alternatives inside the subdivision, and I gave residents several days to move vehicles without penalties or towing. The eastern lane remained open because that part of Patty's argument had always been true. Cedar Ridge had the right to cross my property. They simply never had the right to turn crossing it into controlling it. The final settlement did not hand me every dollar written on my legal pad. Ethan had warned me from the beginning that a demanded daily use charge was leverage, not guaranteed money. Instead, Cedar Ridge agreed to a negotiated payment covering a substantial portion of the disputed use, documented pavement and drainage expenses, and part of my legal costs. More important to me, the agreement stated clearly that the association claimed no right to assign, regulate, permit, or enforce parking in the 24 spaces. Kevin signed for the board. Patty did not attend the final signing. By spring, I hired the same local paving company that had worked on the lot years earlier. They sealed the cracks, resurfaced the worn sections, and painted 24 clean white rectangles across the black asphalt. The smell of fresh seal coat drifted through my office windows. I replaced the old leaning private parking sign with a simple new one identifying the spaces for my building and authorized guests. Nothing dramatic. No warning aimed at Cedar Ridge. No message with Patty's name on it. One Tuesday morning, I drove my work truck into Space 9. I shut off the engine and sat there for a moment. 3 years earlier, a yellow Cedar Ridge warning had waited beneath my windshield wiper in that exact spot. Months later, they had issued another one. Both were still inside the gray folder upstairs beside the deed, easement, tax bills, repair invoices, photographs, certified letters, and settlement agreement. I stepped out, closed the truck door, and looked through the windshield. Nothing under the wiper. No permit required. No association number painted at the end of the space. Just my truck sitting on pavement I maintained and property I owned. The access lane beside me was open, exactly as it had always been required to remain. Patty had spent 3 years treating access like ownership because nobody had forced her to explain the difference. In the end, I did not need to block the road, punish my neighbors, or outshout her at a meeting. I needed 2 words in an old easement, 3 years of records, and enough patience to let Cedar Ridge document its own mistake. The $200 was never the justice. It was only the clock that finally made them pay attention.